This video has been a long time coming, as I intended to make it once I hit 10,000 subscribers, but the thing is, I expected to hit that by the end of this year. About that, F.E.A.R was one of the first horror games I ever became fixated upon, and I was especially fascinated by Alma because I too was a young girl with a lot of anger pent up inside, not for the same reasons, but regardless. That fascination was complicated by the events of the second game due to the fact that A, I was a gay teenager who was, and still is, attracted to spooky women, and B, how that game ended. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, so let's get started. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what your favorite thing about this series was. We begin our journey with an artistic cinematic opening of a man kneeling in a room all by himself until a mysterious voice whispers to him to kill them all, and he proceeds to do just that, waking up a dormant group of soldiers with his echoing scream, doing away with all the guards, and chowing down on one unlucky scientist for essential vitamins and nutrients. This is still one of my favorite openings to a game. The shots, the sound design, the music, it's all great. An unnamed senator is warned about the unfolding situation, and we jump to a briefing with F.E.A.R, First Encounter Assault Recon, a special unit set up by the US military to deal with paranormal threats. Explaining the situation to us, our team coordinator, Rowdy Bedders, breezes right past calling a whole human person property of the Armacam Corporation, because this world has absolutely gone to shit, and we learn that our iron-deficient friend is called Paxton Fettel, a psychic commander created to telepathically control an army of clone soldiers. That good old, we tried to make super soldiers and it went horribly wrong trope. Because Fettel has 1,000 soldiers to hand, the plan is to track down and corner him instead of wading through his troops, which is made easier because of a tracker Armacam planted in his head. They installed a tracker, but not a kill switch. It seems like something of an oversight, but maybe they just figured another synchronicity event wouldn't happen. What's a synchronicity event? All in due time. The attention turns to us, the protagonist, who is only referred to as Point Man, and it's noted that he transferred to the F.E.A.R unit a week ago due to his impressive military record. We leave the briefing and cut to a vision of Fettel looming into view, asking us what our first memory is. The scene flashes to show the lights of an operating theater above us, accompanied by the scream of a girl demanding to know where he is being taken. The next thing we see is a man in a lab coat and glasses claiming that you will be a god among men. Back to reality, Bedders drops us off in an alley to link up with one of our teammates, Jankowski, and yes, you will look at the game in this aspect ratio as God intended. Fettel has been tracked down to an abandoned building in the urban district of Fairport, which is not only the poor, heavily industrialized section of the city, but also doubles as an obscure haunted house attraction, considering how quickly we're hit with the spooky bullshit.
Why did you bring me here? Why'd you bring me back?
We eventually discover the body of a man whose face was simply too delicious to leave intact, but immediately leading up to this discovery, we're haunted by visions in the dead man's voice. He was present for a birth that took place here some time ago. Jankowski calls up our other teammate Jin to investigate the body, as she's our forensic specialist, and sends us ahead to see if we can catch F.E.A.R, leading to one of the better executed jump scares I've seen in a game. Whilst we're dazed, Paxton monologues that the man was called Charles Habiger. He can't tell if his memories of the man are really his or hers, and insists that not just Charles, but everyone he targets deserves to die. Curiously though, he leaves Point Man alive. It would have been very easy to kill him then and there, but all Paxton does is give him a mild concussion before buggering off. We come to learn that replica soldiers have been spotted in the city's harbour and leave to link up with another team of Delta Force operatives led by Sergeant Douglas Holliday. Which is when the game hits us with another vision of surgical lights, the pained screaming of a young girl, and a man's voice urging someone to, "Come on, make her push." So very normal, happy things we're seeing here. We land at the harbour with 3 unnamed red shirts, Delta Force operatives, and upon reaching the gate, one of them sarcastically tells us that they need a specialist to open it, forcing us to separate from the group to go find the switch. Now, these guys were warned not to be careless, that they would not be facing normal enemies, but does that actually make a difference when the supernatural shit comes knocking?
What the hell is that? Over there! Yeah!
Of course not. We're told to reunite with Jankowski's team and fight our way through multiple little arenas worth of replica soldiers, who are impressively reactive and lively for a game released in 2005. They call out to each other, they coordinate, they swear and threaten the player, they express fear, and all of that just makes a moment later in the game so much more unsettling. There are a lot of things in this game I find impressive, and it was while I was distracted by the physics of a swivel chair that the game decided to jump scare me with a ghostly Jankowski face. Moving forward exposes us to disintegrating spectres of the man, his voice echoing around us as he asks, "Is someone there?" We come across more bloody skeletons and eventually drop into a long hallway where the scary child from before makes another appearance. Thankfully, Point Man is partially made of the same stuff Nintendo made the Game Boy from and isn't outright killed by this. We continue chasing after Paxton through a water treatment facility near the harbour, and we overhear through our team coordinator that Delta Force operatives have been diverted to Armacam headquarters. We are so keeping this under wraps, guys, definitely not suspicious at all. Pressing forward, Scary Child continues to follow us, manifesting through our comms as an unknown signal that only broadcasts static, flickering vision, and brief visual appearances, one of which actually managed to get me this time. How many goddamn times have I played this game and there are still moments where this happens? Throughout the game, you can pick up intel that sheds more light on what's happening and why, with one of the earliest examples being in the water treatment plant. An analysis of the wastewater revealed major contamination coming from somewhere upstream. Something that was presented to Armacam and something they are absolutely responsible for, because why else would they care? Making our way deeper into the facility, we encounter multiple visions of Scary Child and fall into a pool of water, triggering a vision where we're walking down a corridor halfway filled with blood, as you do. At the far end are double doors to an operating theatre where a baby can be heard crying, and that young girl's voice screams a drawn-out no, The vision ends when a bloody skeleton tries to engulf us in its arms. Jankowski's ghost scares the shit out of me again, and we eventually run into a flashback of Paxton interrogating another target about the location of Alma, which is the first time we hear her name. She then pops up for a cheeky wee jump scare at the top of a ladder, but I always remember this one. I remember you as well, bitch! Eventually, we find Mr. Moody, the man Paxton was gnawing on, who has just enough life left in him to warn us about Paxton trying to find Alma and Project Origin. Rest in pieces, dude. Wish I could have been there to help Paxton with you, because genuinely, the people who worked on Project Origin, there isn't a deep enough layer of hell. The replica soldiers begin to withdraw from the area, so we follow them and Fettel over to Armacam headquarters, where those diverted Delta Force operatives have been slaughtered like chickens. Fortunately, I am simply built different. We fly in, and after shouting generic military bravado, the two guys in the helicopter with us are shot to pieces on arrival. Sucks to suck. We immediately begin protagonisting our way through Armacam headquarters, learning early on that whilst the bodies of Jankowski's team are accounted for, he's still missing, and his life signs are inconsistent. Sometimes they're fine, sometimes they're gone, and his signal keeps moving to different areas like he's following us, even though he would be on foot and shouldn't be able to keep up. His situation is never truly resolved, we just never find out what exactly happened to him. I mean, we can infer that he's very seriously dead, but the how and when of it is up in the air. Betters has us reset Armacam's network so he can actually tell what the hell is going on inside, and through our navigation of the offices, we can listen into various voice messages to gain additional context for the story. The long and short of it is that Project Origin was permanently shut down because of a synchronicity event when Paxton was a child, and this event involved Paxton connecting with Alma despite the fact that she was in a coma at the time. This wasn't a problem after Origin was shuttered, until the president of the company, Genevieve Aristide, sent people to the facility to see if they could restart it. These people didn't come back, but trying to revive the place seems to have woken something up. Genevieve fucked around, and now we're in the process of finding out. We also learned that Project Origin was started by an Armacam scientist by the name of Harlan Wade. On our way to get the network online, we meet...
Don't shoot! My name is Norton Mapes.
Norton Mapes spends his entire time in this game being a dick, throwing hurdles in our way and generally being a fucking nuisance, but despite him, we do manage to get the network up and running again. Not that it helps much since the security system is isolated from the rest of the network. While moving through an unfinished office section, Paxton mumbles to us that Alma gave birth to him and that they are separate and one at the same time, leading us into a fiery hallucination where wraiths attempt to attack us. When we leave it, Paxton promises to free Alma from her prison. We then come to a large room absolutely splattered with blood from floor to ceiling.
What do you think, Jen?
There was a lot of anger in this room.
That's great. Got anything useful to add?
I don't see any bullet holes. There's no brass lying around either. These guys didn't fire a shot.
Then what killed them?
I don't know.
We press forward, rescue a hostage by the name of Bishop, hand him over to Holiday, and learn that Harlan's daughter, Alice Wade, may be in danger thanks to her and Bishop working on a study of the Auburn district. It would seem that ever since Origin was shut down, people in the area became increasingly prone to nightmares, nausea, poor mental health, and generally came down with a severe case of the bad vibes, which over time caused a socioeconomic downturn of the area as people began leaving. I'm sure it's nothing to do with the high level of undisclosed compounds coming from upstream and entering the water supply of the area. Holiday escorts Bishop to an evac only for Armacam's own security force to gun him down as they leave, because that doesn't scream we have shit to hide at all. Surviving the security goons, we head over to the executive building to rescue Alice, and I don't want to make any assumptions about the dev team, and this isn't kink-shaming, it's just... these are some very detailed feet for 2005. They even put red nail polish on her toes. It would have been less work to just slap some shoes on her. Again, I'm not kink-shaming, I'm just pointing it out. Alice's rescue goes about as smoothly as Bishop's, but she does at least get out of the building alive after a fake-out scare where she's trapped in an elevator with Alma. She's scared of flying, so opts to drive out of there in an effort to find and help her dad Harlan, who has fled to the vault facility. This does not go well for her, as Paxton grabs her and taunts us about it all the way to the aforementioned facility, but before then we have to be sidetracked by our helicopter crashing and forcing us to navigate through derelict buildings to reach the damn place. Now, by this point, we've learned that Project Origin involved a woman called Alma, a powerful psionic who gave live birth to 2 genetically engineered prototypes, the first of which was considered a failure and discarded, the second of which was Paxton. This was done while she was in a medically induced coma, so she was impregnated while unconscious, her body used as a living incubator, and she was made to give birth once the prototypes were ready. You may be wondering then, if they used a woman for this project, why are we being haunted by a little girl? Because Alma was just 8 years old when they induced the coma. They put her in a coma, locked her in a psychic isolation chamber, waited until her body went through puberty, impregnated her at 14 years old, and made her give birth at 15 to the first prototype. She wasn't supposed to wake up, but she did, and she screamed the entire time until they put her under again. And then they put her through that process a second time to create Paxton.
There was a lot of anger in this room.
Fighting through the Origin facility, we remain one step behind Harlan the entire way, only managing to finally corner and execute Paxton after a fiery hallucination has him reveal to us that he and Point Man share the same mother, Alma. He was the firstborn, the prototype Harlan discarded as a failure. Unfortunately, we don't reach him in time to save Alice Wade and have to press on, but with Paxton dead, the replica soldiers, once so lively and full of quips, curses and insults, and the capacity for fear, are just standing there, heads down, arms limp at their sides, empty. You can freely shoot them without any reaction whatsoever, and it feels kinder than just leaving them there. A final laptop gives us a recording of Harlan explaining how disturbed Alma was as a child, stricken by nightmares and hallucinations, and especially sensitive to the negative emotions of those around her. She never had a chance at a normal life thanks to him and Armacam relentlessly experimenting on her since infancy, and when she awoke during the first birth, she didn't stop screaming until the liquid filled her lungs again.
There are plausible scientific explanations for everything that followed, but I think it was really just a question of hatred. It is the way of men to make monsters, and it is the nature of monsters to destroy their makers.
Finally catching up with Harlan, we can only watch from the other side of a locked door as he releases Alma from her tank, remarking that she was placed in there 2 days before her 8th birthday, and died 6 days after they pulled the plug decades later.
Release sequence complete.
This is how it ends. Alma. Ah!
All hell breaks loose in the facility as we're attacked relentlessly by wraiths, but we're nonetheless able to damage the reactor enough to cause a chain reaction and destroy the place. It's just before the explosion goes off that a final hallucination causes Alma to recognize who exactly the Point Man is. We see the moment of his birth again, with Harlan telling the infant that he will be a god among men, ignoring Alma's cries to give the baby back and coldly ordering her to be put back in the vault. As Alma screams, the camera pans down to show her subject file and her full name. Alma Wade. Her own father did this to her, and it's confirmed later in the series that he was the donor for her children. I understand that he's meant to be taken as a complicated figure, but allowing Alma to liquefy him was the only good decision he ever made. Realizing who the Point Man is, Alma is the reason he survives the facility explosion, allowing him to be picked up by his surviving teammates Jin and Holiday. Only for one final jump scare, because horror game.
We still don't know the extent of the damage.
We haven't been able to get through to anyone since the explosion. What about Alma? What happened to her? What was that sound?
Now, there were 2 expansion packs that came with the first F.E.A.R, both of which ultimately didn't matter because ownership of the IP changed hands between the first and second games and what was canon became messy. But I will briefly go over them. The first was Extraction Point. The helicopter carrying Point Man, Douglas, and Jin crash lands and they get moving to an extraction point on the roof of Auburn Hospital. On the way, Paxton pops back up even though we killed him a few hours ago, and he even directly says that the circumstances don't make sense before attacking with reawakened replicas. Alma's spooky, scary ghosts killed Douglas in a warehouse and she clears the way for Point Man by blending her way through a lot of replica soldiers. There's a distinct difference between child Alma being protective or helpful and adult Alma lashing out at everything in a blind rage. Finally reaching the hospital, Jin is also killed by ghosts, and the Point Man watches child Alma and adult Alma merge into one entity. He also reaches safety, but Paxton shows up to destroy his ride home and all he can do is watch the city burn. The end. The second expansion pack was Perseus Mandate. A second team of F.E.A.R operatives is sent to investigate Armacham in the middle of the first game's events, fighting replica soldiers, apparitions, and a new mercenary faction called the Nightcrawlers. The Nightcrawlers are working at the behest of Senator Hoyle from the start of the game, and they're attempting to recover samples of Alma and Paxton's DNA. Thanks to the protagonists, they don't get Alma's DNA, but they do get Paxton's. This is troublesome because Paxton is the template from which all the replicas are cloned, meaning they could just make more of them now, I guess. Is that all understood? Cool, now we throw both of those expansions in the trash because they're not considered canon going forward. F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin opens with a vision of Fairport, desolate and burning, the sky above a twisting morass of scarlet clouds. The first thing we see is Alma, as spooky as ever, holding a doll, her feet covered in blood. Following her down the street leads to a glowing pit over which looms a dead tree with a swing attached to it. Descending takes us out of the vision, and...
Nice of you to join us, sunshine.
I mean, it's a horror game, remember? Here we're playing as Michael Beckett, a member of the Delta Force team Dark Signal, and we've been sent to take Genevieve Aristide into protective custody before Armacham can terminate her as company president. Literally. The rest of the team is made up by Stokes, Jankowski, the other Jankowski's brother, Keegan, Morales, Fox, and the team leader Griffin. It's clear from the jump that Alma has some kind of interest in Beckett already to be manifesting around him this early, and god do I wish it was just because they turned out to be blood-related rather than what it actually is. The bad vibes also seem to affect Keegan, but no one else in the team is really falling foul of psychic fuckery. Anyways, it's briefly mentioned that we should be thankful we're being sent to grab Aristide rather than help at Armacham HQ because the place is a bloodbath, indicating that we're somewhere just before the facility explosion. Dark Signal infiltrates the Valkyrie Towers building and comes up against Armacham goons sent to eliminate Aristide, all the while Alma continually pops up to unnerve us. Most of these appearances I'm familiar with, but as with the first game, there were a few of Alma's cheeky wee pranks that I hadn't encountered before. One notable encounter is when Beckett passes through a swimming pool and goes under, falling into a vision of Alma inside her tank at the Origin facility. We hear Harlan's voice comment that she's been in there for 12 years, floating in darkness, which pairs with a line we hear not long after that Alma doesn't realize she's a woman now rather than the 8-year-old child she was locked away as. Which, again, is what I hope the intended understanding is, and not she has adult urges and doesn't know how to control them because she's still mentally 8 years old, but given how the game ends... We reach Aristide's penthouse, and uncovering her panic room requires interacting with the same music box from the beginning, something that once belonged to Alma and Aristide requested to have. Why on earth would she want it? Unclear. I certainly wouldn't want a reminder of the forced child pregnancy project, but you know, that's just me. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I grew to be somewhat fixated on Alma as a character at the time, so the tune of this music box has been buried deep enough in my brain that I will sometimes start humming it at random. Our rescue of Aristide is interrupted by the vault facility exploding, signaling the end of the first game's events and Alma's freedom from captivity, which is visually shown by her child form shifting to an adult as she looks out the window. Beckett and his team are knocked out by this event, and Aristide pulls an Uno reverse card by taking them into custody, bringing the team down to a shady facility to perform some kind of horrible surgical procedure on them, and not much caring about the safety of said procedures.
We could be in V-Fit. Charge to 200. No, make that 300.
Dr. York.
He's alive, but we're moving too fast. We need
Just
to...
get him done.
That did it. Stand by with that morphine. 4 mags.
Where are we at, Dr. York?
He's tachycardic. We need to stabilize before progressing.
No time.
He's unstable. Progressing now would be a mistake. You're putting... Set to 300. You'll feel a little pinch. Now.
This procedure activates some of the team's latent psychic potential, allowing Beckett to use the exact same bullet time mechanic as Point Man. How convenient. The only people unaffected by this are Morales and Stokes. Morales because he's just built different, and Stokes because considering how this game ends, it's not like Alma would take any interest in her, even though biological limits shouldn't matter, because Alma is both a puppeted corpse and a ghost, so how in the does that work anyway? I hate it here. We get moving to find our way out of the creepy and seemingly abandoned hospital, I guess? Haunted by visions of an understandably decrepit and grown version of Alma shuffling her bony ass around as if trying to lead us out of here. Unfortunately for us, Armacam security has busted in and started killing all the staff and patients in their search for Aristide, deploying Colonel Vanek to make sure none of this ever makes it to the public and all the blame can be laid on Aristide. Linking up with her and Stokes, she directs Beckett to the TAC lab under the pretense that it'll help them deal with Alma. We're also helped along by a mysterious man hacking into our military comms who calls himself Snake Fist.
You can call me Snake Fist.
Snake Fist? Are you fucking kidding me?
Reaching the lab, Beckett enters the telesthetic attunement chamber, which Aristide insists will make him strong enough to fight Alma, and Stokes worries will make him sterile. I wish. Armacam busts in to try and stop us, but Alma takes it personally and divorces the soldiers from their skeletons, yeeting Beckett into a vision of a grassy hill with a tree swing at the top where young Alma is playing peacefully. We exit the vision to see J. Jonah Jameson pretending that he's some military dude called Vanek, and he name-drops Project Harbinger as the only reason Aristide would have brought us here. He splits off to deal with the rest of our team, and we find our way out of the lab. Snakefist also mentions Project Harbinger, urging us to get out of the facility before it's destroyed, because Beckett is the chosen one and all is lost if he dies. He also confirms Alma is fixated on Beckett because his psychic power is like catnip to her. This would be fine if the devs had been normal about it. Anyway, we start seeing signs of ritualistic bullshit with symbols and illegible writing scrawled in blood, because why not? And it's shortly made clear why that is, because there are feral test subjects loose in the facility, and I hate these little bastards. Absolute nightmare. Somewhere in the surgery wing, we stumble across Jankowski on an operating table, mutilated and dying, with his last words being a plea to help her, meaning Alma. It doesn't take much longer for another team death, as Fox has been communicating his unease with the facility, only to hear a crying woman who lost her babies that he insists on needing to help. Upon passing through a door, Fox grabs Beckett and snarls to stay away from her, she's mine, before he seems to snap out of it and promptly gets sent to God's recently deleted, courtesy of Alma, who may or may not have confused Fox with Harlan due to him being a father with a daughter.
To shreds, you say?
Fighting through more test subjects and Colonel Vanek's attempts at killing us, Alma attempts to physically grab on and we're required to mash Q to shove her away, something that will be repeated many times throughout the game. I love making the players, who might or might not have experience with this kind of subject matter in their personal lives, play out the act of fending someone off. Very good gameplay decision. We end up in an arena where Vanek leaves one of the subdued abominations to control a bunch of replica soldiers, assuming we'll just die. But joke's on him, we have a stalker who explodes that test subject into a fine red mist so that she can have us later. Yay? Eventually, we are finally allowed to leave this hell pit of medical malpractice and see what's become of the city. It's on the streets littered with fire, corpses, and ghosts that we encounter my second least favorite enemy in the game, these puppet master f***ers who run around and wake up any corpses in the area to fight for them. We're halfway to the agreed rally point when Snakefist needs us to come to his location at Wade Elementary because Aristide is making her way over and leading Armacham forces right to him. And then Griffin starts hearing a crying woman. This goes exactly as well for him as you expect it to, especially when he snaps out of it and starts shooting. Linking up with Keegan, Stokes, and Morales, we head to Wade Elementary, where we are immediately separated from our team again. It's readily apparent that something weird was going on at this school because 1. It's called Wade Elementary, 2. Armacham is involved, 3. There's this whole system of sorting kids into categories, and 4. One of the intel packets you pick up is about the kids here reporting nightmares of being strapped down and tortured with needles, which obviously they wouldn't have any experience with, so wow. I wonder where scenarios like that are coming from. Must be violent video games or something. What a mystery. The school also contains my least favorite sections, both of which involve you trying to navigate a space while being hounded by ghosts from all directions, one of which takes place in a dark basement. 10 out of 10, I hate it, thank you for the scares. Unfortunately, it's here where a significant turning point is reached when it comes to Alma's fixation with Beckett, as she once again attacks him and is rebuffed. Not understanding why he would reject her, she angrily pins him against the wall and seems to withdraw for a moment, only to transform her appearance from her true physical body to something that, on the surface, will appeal to baser instincts.
I'm in danger!
Listen, making jokes is how I cope, but you know I'm going to be serious when we actually get to the end of this horrible build-up. With that unsettling development squatting on our brains like an incontinent chimp, we make it to the nurse's office and descend into the secret facility built to experiment on the school children with special compounds based on what category they were sorted into for the sole purpose of creating candidates for Project Harbinger, and oh, by the way, most of Dark Signal went through this process because of course. We manage to reach Snakefist, killing Colonel Vanek in the process, and Terry Halford introduces himself just long enough to tell us all his files are being uploaded to our APC, and also a tangent about hippos.
I grabbed it from the experimental weapons lab when the shit started flying. Which reminds me, have you ever seen a hippopotamus fight? They start crapping and wagging their tails really fast and shit just flies everywhere. It's fucking insane.
Anyways...
Now, let's get the hell out of here!
Escaping the facility, we get to the APC with Stokes and Keegan and go over the files Terry sent us. It's explained through some artistic expression on his part that Aristide intentionally linked Beckett to Alma and then used the tack to strengthen the link, which has turned him into walking bait. The only way to avoid getting overwhelmed is to strap him into a special chair on Still Island that will amplify his brainwaves and make him strong enough to psychically destroy her. Still Island also just so happens to be where Alma was held before she was locked away in the vault, so this is going to suck tremendously. Before we can get there, we're sidetracked by the roads being a hot mess, requiring a brief detour through the subway system. Sorry, did I say brief? I meant long-ass section because Keegan gets lured away by Alma and we have to go after him. Naturally, this leads to more moments of Alma stalking the player. We make it up to the streets finally and fight our way through more replica until we eventually come to a chasm surrounded by ghosts, with Keegan standing on the edge of it. He keeps disappearing and getting ahead of us, and following him brings us down to the supply tunnels that link Still Island to the destroyed vault facility. It's here we see some of the replica without their helmets on, and it's clear the cloning process is not perfect, leaving many of them both disfigured and bald. Being so close to the end here, it's worth bringing up that all of the replica forces so far have been following Alma's will, since Paxton is still very much dead and nowhere to be seen until the terminally dull Reborn DLC, but we'll get to that. Point is, Alma doesn't want to kill Beckett. She wants him. The replica are acting in accordance to that want. We didn't have to end up here, but the devs decided this was a good direction to take the story, so here we fucking are! Fighting through those replica and following Keegan's trail eventually takes us on a final tram ride to Still Island, where Stokes passes along one of Halford's recordings about Alma.
All the way was 8 years old when they put her in the vault. Her own father stuck her in a suspension tank in an induced coma, knowing she'd probably never wake up again. Well, she did.
Right after she gave birth to the first prototype, she was 15. And the second prototype was born a year later. She woke up for that one too.
She didn't like them taking her babies away from her. A few years after that,
They decided she was becoming too dangerous. When they realized she was influencing the second prototype's actions,
even though she was completely unconscious and locked away deep underground
in a telesthetic suppression field.
So they turned off her life support and sealed up the facility. Just left her to drown in amniotic fluid in that miserable little tank she'd been floating in since she was a little girl. Well, her heart shut down, but her psychic signature didn't.
Not many people can just refuse to die.
Harlan Wade was right. We make our own monsters, and they come back to haunt us.
I appreciated this moment for bringing the tragedy of all this to the forefront. Alma does need to be stopped. She's a danger to everything around her. But no one should be happy about it. It's not a good thing that it came to this when from the very beginning people treated her like a thing. Something to study and experiment on, a potential weapon, a source of power, a living incubator for someone's dreams of the ultimate soldier. She was never a person to anyone involved in that project. And if no one has ever treated you like a person, how could you be expected to act like one? All of which just makes the following section and the end of this game leave a very sour taste in my mouth. We can't reach Still Island until we have one last encounter with Alma before the end, where she repeatedly attempts to overpower Beckett, forcing him to navigate through a maze of crates each time he pushes her away. We're then thrown into a vision of Alma's happy place, that swing on the grassy hill, only to see the moment Harlan ordered her locked away. The vision then fades to show us that in reality, her happy place was just a sad little drainage ditch surrounded by concrete. There's faded paint on the walls to make it look like blue sky, clouds, and flocks of birds, and her doll is still on the ground where she dropped it. We're able to make it through to Stokes and Morales with Keegan nowhere in sight, and we fend off waves of replica soldiers until Stokes is finally able to get the doors working. Once inside, we power up the amplifier and get Beckett strapped in, only for Aristide to finally pop up again and ruin everyone's day by shooting Stokes in the gut, abandoning the now helplessly restrained Beckett to Alma's full attention, and closing the amplifier on both of them in an effort to trap Alma and save her own skin. It still fucks me up that they had a fully trained military operative with her hands free here and didn't have Stokes immediately take the gun off Aristide and shove her off the platform, but whoopsie fucking doodle. Now, I am going to go over the details of the final battle and the ending, and if you want to skip that, please go to the timestamp on screen because this is when the rape happens. Overwhelmed by Alma, the player is thrown into a twisted mindscape containing the chair, Alma's swing, and a timer showing how long he's been here that rapidly flicks through numbers. All the while, you can hear Alma vocalizing her pleasure in the distance, ensuring the player cannot ignore what is happening to them. We have to flip 3 switches to get out of here, and just as we reach the first switch, a corrupt version of Keegan attacks us, fueled by jealous rage over Alma choosing Beckett over him. We're briefly shown the reality of Alma using Beckett's body, and this happens again when we throw the first switch, but this time we're shown Alma physically beating Beckett back into submission. We're shown this at the second switch as well, and at the third switch we're locked in a struggle with Keegan, forcing the gun away from our face and into his as he begs for our help, all the while interspersed with visions of Alma and her moaning. When the third switch is finally thrown, Alma appears to burn up like a firework and lights slowly come back on inside the amplifier, giving us a moment of hope that is quickly shattered. So, I don't want to get too sidetracked here because the video is already going to be so long, but this was a recklessly callous thing to do. The interactive element of games means that the player feels involved in the story. Horror games scare you more than films because you are in the horror. You have to move forward. You have to fight the man-made horrors beyond comprehension. As I have said before, there are just certain topics you need to take care with. You can't just spring first-person on a player and go, tee-hee, how scary and disturbing, leaving the door open for games media at the time to do shit like this because LOL sexy ghost lady. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me with a straight face that if the genders were swapped, there would have been a game cover with a conventionally attractive naked spooky man on the cover with a cute "blank wants you to die" caption. The fact of the matter is that statistically speaking, you are always going to have people in your audience who have experienced this specific trauma, and I do not want to hear devil's advocates showing up to argue that it's a horror game so anything goes. No, you are creating something that involves artistic and literary skill. Video games are art. If you want to avoid narrative critique, then go back to playing fucking Warzone.
Oh, you're upset about the rape, but not about all the killing we do?
Yes, because people who have been killed don't tend to play video games or really do much of anything, whilst people who have survived rape are still around and have to navigate a world filled with callous dickheads like you. Anyway, the Reborn DLC is like 2 hours of a replica soldier going rogue and then being possessed by Paxton Fettel, so he's reborn, but this never amounts to fucking anything because he just shows up as a powerful ghost in the third game, so what was the point? Moving on. The third game is a mess of weird decisions, and while I personally prefer to play, cover, and interpret games without knowing what's going on behind the scenes, because that is how most people experience them, I did end up reading about what Day One Studios was dealing with just because I was curious about what the hell happened. The long and short of it is that Warner Brothers wanted them to contort F.E.A.R into a Call of Duty clone to make big bucks and put the team through heinous levels of crunch, resulting in many of the devs leaving throughout the process. Day One was not happy with the end result. It was not the game they wanted to make, and I'm sad that we'll probably never get to see what their original intent was. That being said, let's get started with F.E.A.R 3, or F.E.A.R as it was written for some godforsaken reason that I'll blame Warner Brothers for too. We begin with a brief recap of the first game by Paxton that fades into a white void where child Alma sits at the bottom of a tree humming the tune of her music box until she's frightened by something growling off screen. Alma herself being terrified of something will be a running theme throughout this game as it slowly becomes apparent we have a far more malicious monster to be worried about. We start with Point Man being interrogated by Armacam in a South American prison they own. Where in South America? Just guess, forehead, because the game isn't going to tell you. The guards want to know where Jin Sung Kwan is, so they're beating the shit out of Point Man instead of just triangulating her signal or even just waiting for her to say herself because she's actively communicating through a goddamn earpiece.
Underground tunnels.
With Paxton's help, we kill the interrogators and start fighting our way out of the prison. Along the way, we see Alma as a slightly older child than we're used to, and also as an adult, naked, heavily pregnant, and draped in floor-length black hair, almost giving her a La Llorona vibe with her appearance in combination with her screams and wailing. It doesn't take long for another entity to make itself known, however, a tall, gangly monster without a face and a gory hollow where its pelvis should be, known as the Creep. Thanks to the floor collapsing out from under us, we find our way into the sewers and we're treated to a flashback of what happened to Paxton and Point Man while they were children. This happens between each level, and this first one focuses on how Harlan locked them away like monsters from the onset, housing them in a single observation room together. Similar to a note from F.E.A.R 2 mentioning that Alma would become nearly catatonic with fear as a child when Harlan became angry around her, when the boys can tell Harlan is approaching their room, they quickly stop playing and just sit still. Not that it stops Harlan from forcefully injecting Paxton with something despite the child squirming in obvious discomfort. We wake up in the sewers to find them absolutely packed with corpses, presumably other victims of Armacam's operations here, and quickly try to get the hell out of there. Not that we get far before Armacam finds us.
Med, Echo 3-1. We got him. Preparing for pacification and transport. Come up at the northwest corridor.
There is something viscerally saddening about Alma reverting back to a terrified child in the presence of this thing, and considering even the small amount of focus on Harlan's cruelty, it does not take much to put two and two together regarding who the Creep represents. Reaching the streets, we fight through generic South American slum in this unnamed location, and eventually hijack a helicopter that can bring us to Fairport. A second flashback reveals that Harlan never told the boys they were related, and that everything he did to them was to make them killers, as we watch the boys innocently play with the toy guns he gave them. Approaching Fairport, Paxton begins probing Point Man about what it felt like to kill his own brother, needling him for just doing what he was told and never questioning his orders. Of course, Point Man never verbally responds to him, so at this point it's safe to assume that our very fast boy has simply been mute this whole time. Anyways, a blood-red pulse rips through the sky and sends them crashing into a legally distinct Costco, and because the front doors have security bars over them, we have to navigate a place full of people driven absolutely bitch cakes by Alma's psychic contractions. You heard me. That pulse was because of a contraction. It's been 9 months since the last game's events. I hate it here. Fighting through Darkside Tarzan's jungle gym, we're treated to the experience of being hunted by a pack of feral people, navigating their dens, the walk-in freezer section, and the worst of these little f***ers who have strapped improvised bombs to their chests. There are murals of blood everywhere, most of it unreadable and made of spiraling symbols, and a depiction of Alma screaming. You can also occasionally find a Triskelion, which in Celtic context is usually linked to the cycle of birth, life, and death, which I found mildly interesting here. Near the store's meat deli section, we see Alma again as an adult, only for the creep to make an appearance and revert her to a scared, screaming child. Harlan's voice tells us to go back, that he won't allow us to find her. But do we listen? Absolutely not. Fuck Harlan. We eventually come to an arena the cultists have built out of every available red banner they could get their hands on, creating a shrine around a giant crib because Mother is going to pop soon. We have to fight our way out, not just through the ferals, but also through Armacam, who turn up in time to get their shit rocked, and we move on to the suburbs in our search for Jin. A flashback shows us Harlan dragging Paxton out of the observation room against his will. Paxton is then returned much later in a catatonic state, and when Pointman tries to snap him out of it, he freaks, thrashing and screaming. Because this 10-year-old child is beginning to feel the utter horrors his mother went through and is not remotely equipped to deal with any of that. Armacam is trying to wipe out any witnesses of their bullshit, which involves pretty much everyone in Fairport at this point, so we find our way through the suburbs, dipping in and out of ruined houses, yards, and dealing with the creep once more, because Harlan never really did care for the word no. Using an exosuit, we fight our way to a relay station where Jin is hiding out, kill another phase commander, because by the way Armacam has soldiers who can phase through solid objects now, and finally link up with her. It's at this point that the boys learn about Beckett through a recording of him in Armacam captivity.
Became obsessed with me. Don't you people understand? Why was she ever created? What good did they think would come of that nightmare? Horrible. She raped me. Do you hear me, Armacam? She's fucking pregnant! A ghost in the flesh.
Jin is obviously in the "we need to prevent this from happening" camp and is weirdly aggro when she leans into Pointman's space, but also she looks weirdly plastic next to Paxton and Pointman. They look like actual human beings with skin texture, wear and tear, and eyes that don't look dead and glassy. Like, if she's been on the run from Armacam the last 9 months just trying to not get murderized, she would not have a full face of makeup on and perfectly tweezed eyebrows. Women do in fact care more about survival than looks. Paxton is, of course, much more interested in continuing Alma's legacy, though his idea of how to do that is, not the most well-adjusted, I would say. In flashbacks, we're shown Pointman trying to play with Paxton and their toy guns, but Paxton is ignoring him, too caught up in Alma's rage against Harlan and what he had done to them all. He starts working on a dark and disturbing mural across the wall, something we see grow on the main menu as we progress further into the game, and something Harlan seems a little unsettled by. Jin and Pointman enter the city proper to hijack some Armacam transport pods that'll get them closer to their new goal of finding Beckett, only for Jin to get instantly dragged away by a pair of cultists that Pointman and his insanely fast reflexes are helpless to stop because fuck you. Not that it actually matters because she escapes on her own, so good for her. As we progress through this level, a phase commander continually speaks to us over the comms to insult Pointman's existence as a failure, referring to him as Armacam property and also, unfortunately, inbred. He eventually gets his hands on Jin, and we have to fight our way through to free her, though I do appreciate that holding onto that laser weapon allowed me to stun-lock the bastard until he perished. Pointman is almost crushed by a collapsing tower if not for Paxton yeeting him out of the way, where he is immediately picked up by Jin and shoved into a launch pod with the express instructions to stop Alma from giving birth and kill whatever comes out of her if she does. The next flashback shows Harlan taking Paxton's toy gun away in his sleep, intentionally sowing resentment and suspicion between the brothers. Paxton, already emotionally fragile thanks to Harlan's abuse and Alma's pain, has a full-blown meltdown that moves the object in the room and scares his brother. In the present day, Paxton tries to convince his brother that they don't have to stop this, that they need to think about the situation as a family. Rich words considering his ending of the game, but Paxton isn't exactly working with a full deck of cards when it comes to normal social engagements. Unfortunately, Alma's contractions fuck up the navigation of the launch pods, causing them to crash all over the place. We end up on a ruined bridge, and the first half of this level is one of the better, scarier ones, in my opinion, as you pick your way through wrecked train cars without a means to defend yourself, while unknown creatures are creeping about and murdering everything else. The latter half is fighting more Armacam soldiers until we reach the end, fall into the ocean, and listen to Paxton make a pun about our circumstances.
If this is part of your plan, then I'd say things are going quite swimmingly.
Making it to the airport, we fight through an obscene amount of bullshit to eventually reach Beckett, who is understandably not doing great. He's going to get worse, unfortunately, since Point Man can't talk and no one else can see Paxton, even though you'd think Beckett would be able to, because he's a powerful psionic, but whatever. Paxton possesses the man to get information thereafter, subjecting Beckett to another violation of body and mind right after stating that doing so will kill him. The moment Paxton finds the memory of what happened to Beckett, he doubles over and pukes, and while no one else has ever been able to do it, Beckett is strong enough to fight off Paxton's influence just long enough to demand that Point Man kills whatever is growing inside Alma. Then he explodes into chunky salsa. Paxton's maniacal laughter cuts to a scene in the White Void where Paxton and Point Man are playing on a carousel as children. They're interrupted by the appearance of young child Alma with blood coating her lower legs. Paxton immediately runs to her, happy to see her and hold her hand, while Point Man is confused and apprehensive. When Alma reaches out to him, he takes a step back, unsure, but even he ultimately walks to her and takes her hand. There isn't a flashback to the observation room here, instead opening with Paxton and Point Man hiding in the woods as children, working up the nerve to face a monster called the Creep, which is when we first hear its name. They open the outer doors to a basement under an abandoned old house and descend, switching to the brothers as adults when they stand in front of the origin facility that held them as children. This level is entirely focused on facing the Creep and the horrible memories the brothers have of this place, showing flashbacks of what he inflicted on them in his desire to leave a legacy of gods.
Again. Move! Faster!
It was here that he pushed us to our limits.
Show me your special, like your soulmate! Show me you have some worth! Focus! Concentrate! You are stronger than this! Show me how special you are! Don't disappoint me! Don't be like him! I want to see you do it!
This is the room that made me a killer.
Yes! Focus!
That's much better. Better than I hoped.
We finally face off against a giant version of the Creep, damaging him again and again as he screams about how their family could have been gods, berating the brothers for daring to break away, that they owe their existence to him. With each blow, pieces of the Creep's skull break off, until it's finally ripped away to reveal Harlan's face underneath. Back to reality, the brothers are waiting outside a room in an undisclosed location. It's not made clear if this is still somewhere in the ward facility, the house above it, or otherwise, but I'm just gonna assume the facility, for whatever reason. We finally see Alma as she actually is, and it is pure body horror aimed at every single person in possession of a uterus, because absolutely everything about this, very effective, I hate it. Now, the game has 2 endings, and these are determined by which brother earned the most points over the course of the game. And this isn't like seamlessly cut to and revealed as it happens to preserve some kind of tension. It's shown by the brothers fighting while text and colors pop up to indicate which of them did best, and fades to black to load in the correct scene. For the vast majority of people, it'll be Point Man's ending, unless you played co-op and either you or your partner played as Paxton. The other option is, of course, to play the game again as Paxton, because you only unlock that after completing it as Point Man. If Paxton wins, he kills and possesses Point Man's body, cannibalizes Alma to absorb her power, and takes the child as his own. But if Point Man wins, it almost looks like he's going to kill his mother, but instead helps her give birth and swaddles the child, smiling at it. Alma then peacefully fades away, and everything begins returning to normal while Point Man walks away with his new sibling in his arms. So, that was a lot, and I'm sure you can already guess some of the things I'll want to change, because I know I can be very predictable sometimes. There's a lot to appreciate about F.E.A.R. At the core of it, this is a story about abuse, and Alma's position as a villain is more liquid than not, but there's definitely space for alternatives, and you know I have a chronic need to add emotional depth to shit, so let's fucking go, shall we? It's best to think of this in terms of a remake. There are a few things I would change with the first game, but it largely follows the same plot beats. Alma connects to Paxton again because Aristide fucked around and the F.E.A.R. team arrives right at the finding out part of the equation. We'd bring forward Harlan's abusiveness from the third game, as while I understand 90% of how he's depicted there is due to being Alma's memory of him rather than his actual spirit or whatever, if this is how the boys remember him, he wasn't exactly winning Father of the Year, now was he? Not to mention that you do not knowingly place your own daughter, at 8 years old, in a medically induced coma, to wait until her body goes through puberty, to then impregnate her with your own DNA, and then watch her wake up screaming during the first birth, put her back in the vault, and then decide to do it again because the first forced pregnancy didn't have the result you wanted. You can't do all of that without being a weapons-grade piece of shit. Now, I'm not saying he can't be complex, just that when it comes to Project Origin, Alma, and psionic powers, Harlan would be deep in the sunk cost mindset that, yes, what he's done has without a doubt earned him a seat in hell, but since there's nothing that he could do that would ever make up for it, he has to just keep going forward. Naturally, this leads to terrible places. In this version of things, Harlan has some degree of psionic ability, and so did Alma's mother, Elizabeth, who was in many ways similar to Alma, including how Harlan treated her. There'd be intel packets for all of this, most of them found in the vault facility late in the game. Alma remains an ever-present source of unease and scares, and while her child form in the second game Onward is depicted with her legs from the knee down being covered in blood because of her tendency to lash out and murder people, I would make one very important adjustment. There's still blood on her legs, but it goes all the way up under her dress, and it's only on the inside of them. I'm sure you can understand the point of that change. It's disturbing and uncomfortable, and a visual reminder of exactly what Harlan did to her, rather than an indication of how dangerous she is. On the other end of things, Point Man remains mute, but he'll take after Doom Guy from the 2016 rendition, where his physical reactions are much more apparent, and when necessary he'll click his tongue to answer yes or no questions if the person asking can't see him. This is put down in his heavily redacted file as a trauma response from early childhood, which would be an intel packet the player is able to pick up in the briefing room with betters, along with files on Sun Quan and Jankowski. The file would indicate that he has a real name, but it's redacted, leaving only the call sign of Point Man. We have all the same run-ins with Paxton asking cryptic questions and remarking about where Point Man came from, what he remembers, etc. And I'd add to this a flashback where he hears Harlan's voice on a phone message at Armacam HQ, where we get a first-person perspective on that boxing ring scene from the 3rd game. It's here that we learn Point Man's first name is Quinn, because that's what Harlan is shouting. He's breathing heavily when he comes out of it and thumps his fist against the wall several times, trying to release the tension before he gets up and soldiers on. Alice Wade is still cornered in a lift with Alma, but this actually does something rather than serve as a fake-out. Instead, Alma telepathically reveals everything Harlan did to her, her sons, and their mother, which sets Alice on a warpath against Harlan for the rest of the series, because Alice genuinely did not know anything regarding Alma, Project Origin, or Perseus, and because Alice's blood, Alma gave her the unspoken choice to align with Harlan or align with her, and Alice chose her sister. She still escapes to the vault facility, but this is to free Alma, and Paxton is the one who confronts Harlan while we're fighting our way through the facility. We'd see Paxton corner Harlan in one of the labs where Harlan is trying to access a machine that would enhance his psionic abilities. Paxton remarks that he must be desperate to risk dying so horribly. Burning out one's nervous system is a uniquely violent way to go. Harlan fires back that risks must be taken to correct such grievous mistakes, clearly referring to Paxton and Alma. Up to this point, Paxton has been unsettlingly calm, even when talking about the torture inflicted on the people who took part in Origin, but this makes him snarl that he and his mother are not mistakes. Alma was a child who needed safety and care, and Paxton was treated like a lab rat from the day he was born. Harlan never gave any of them a chance at normalcy. Harlan lunges, and after a brief struggle, Paxton rips Harlan's throat out with his teeth, only for Harlan to shoot him in the head. The bullet hits something in the room that floods it with a chemical fog, a sickly neon yellow, identical in color to the needles that increase our reflex meter. All we see is Harlan thrashing in the fog, screaming in agony as he collapses out of sight and falls silent. Later, as we approach the isolation tank, we hear Alice frantically explain why she has to do this, what Harlan did, and why Alma has to be free. We see the corpse of Alma emerge from her prison and see her join her sister. This seems to overwhelm Alice, who screams and runs from the facility, psychically tearing at the walls and destroying much of the infrastructure in her wake. Because Quinn doesn't fully understand his connection to all of this, he follows through with destroying the facility, but after Alma is free and connects with him, she stops attacking him with phantoms and protects him from the explosion afterwards, and that's how he survives the nuclear blast. Alma and Alice disappear, and she doesn't pop up in the helicopter to cause its crash. Rather, the epilogue ends with Quinn leaving a debrief and returning to his quarters with F.E.A.R. He sits on the edge of his bed and stares at the dog tags in his hand, hearing echoes of the questions Paxton asked him through the game. What his first memory was, where he grew up, who raised him, until it finishes with, "Do you know who you are, Quinn Conrad?" The echo becomes much more present as Quinn looks up to see Paxton's red ghostly form leaning against the wall across from him, and it cuts to that same familiar flashback of his birth, of Alma screaming, of Harlan telling the infant Quinn that he will be a god among men, and the final pan of the camera to show Alma's file with the Wade surname. Giving him the last name Conrad is a nod to a scrapped character from the first game called Conrad Krieg, who eventually became the character of Paxton Fettel. The only remnant of this is the outfit Paxton wears. Now, this sets up a bunch of stuff going forward, Alma continuing to float around doing goth girl shit, but with the support of a baby sister, Harlan dying under unusual circumstances that are absolutely going to make him a much bigger threat later on, and Paxton linking up with the Point Man much earlier now that our mute boy understands his part in all this. Next!
Nice.
We keep the same general outline of a new squad of characters sent to collect Genevieve Aristide, but fuck everything to do with that ending, oh my god. We still play as Beckett. However, he is voiced, and he is not a physical powerhouse with minimal academics. He's former Black Ops who was handpicked for the Dark Signal unit, a stealth and infiltration specialist with a rangy build and a clipped, subdued manner of speaking. He's observant, intelligent, and has a very bleak sense of humor, but is also shown to be highly empathetic. For his voice, I'm picturing Gunnar Wright, who voices Isaac Clarke in Dead Space. So, Dark Signal goes to take Aristide into protective custody. The vault facility explodes, they're knocked out, she brings them down to the Harbinger facility, etc. Instead of copy-pasting Point Man's bullet time reflexes, Beckett acquires the ability to turn himself invisible. This, in combination with his military training, makes him an absolute nightmare to fight. He also finds he has an empathetic ability to see flashes of the past when he touches certain objects or places with strong emotion tied to them, otherwise called psychometry. As for the rest of the team, Griffin gains a moderate level of telekinesis, Keegan gains a high level of telekinesis which later develops into pyrokinesis because of plot reasons, Stokes gains extrasensory perceptions making it nearly impossible to get the drop on her and starts to hear and see things the others can't. Fox and Morales both gain mild telekinesis, and Jankowski is still horribly mutilated and dying by the time we find him, so we don't get to see what he may have had. The major theme for this game would be the violation of consent, the abuse of authority, and the isolation of victims. Beckett and Stokes have both already experienced leading to close communication and trust between the two of them as fellow survivors. Conversely, from the beginning and throughout the game, there'd be an uncomfortable tension with Keegan, who puts on a friendly face but likes getting his way and making dodgy sexual jokes. Once the team starts trying to escape from the facility, Beckett starts to see flashes of a masculine monster following him. A crawling, muscular humanoid covered in dense black hair that almost makes it blend into the shadows. It has no discernible face, but it wears a heavy chain necklace that gives away its presence, even if you can't see it yet. It's referred to as the Beast, and it stalks Beckett over the course of the game, always chasing, but never quite making contact, even as it violently dismembers and shreds anything else in its way, be they Armacam, Replica, or other members of Dark Signal like Fox in the Harbinger facility, and Griffin later on the streets before they head to the school. It'll be perched up in dark corners on the ceiling, lurking under desks, any shadowy nook or crevice where the player will least be expecting something of its size and bulk to be hiding. Encounters with this creature send Beckett into flashbacks of his early years in the Marines, serving abroad and making friends with the other men in his unit. One particular friend, a large man called Frank, wears a chain necklace, and over time steadily manipulates, isolates, and gaslights Beckett. Nothing is ever explicitly shown, but each flashback becomes more uncomfortable than the last, and the answer of what Frank did to Beckett should be easy enough to infer without ever exposing the player to an actual visual of it. Stokes sees her own monster, which we only get a brief description of since Beckett is on his own most of the time, but she describes it as having too many hands and smelling like whiskey. Beckett knows the smell of whiskey is a trigger for Stokes. It's why she doesn't drink, and when either of them has their encounter with these creatures, the other is quick to try and ground them so they don't dissociate from staying alive in the here and now. The goofiness of Snake Fist feels wildly at odds with the absolutely horrible shit going on in this game, so instead the team is aided by a hard-nosed military doctor who loyally works for Armacam but takes issue with Aristide's recklessness. He's still called Terry Halford, but Dr. Terrence Halford to sound more formal. All of the weirdness happening so far has been pinned on Alma, including the emergence of Stokes and Beckett's respective monsters, so the team is very much convinced that Alma is the problem and they're trusting Aristide has an answer. When they get to Wade Elementary, Stokes and Beckett both start feeling uneasy as they slowly remember being experimented on as children. We still encounter Alma in the school because Alice is after information on the databanks here. She initially perceives us as a threat, trying to drive the team away with this spooky scary basement gauntlet, only to pin Beckett to the wall when he survives that. She's just about to kill him when their minds touch and there's a rapid flicker of snapshots from both of their lives. An exchange. Alma drops him and a distorted whisper would be heard saying, "Your pain is mine," before she vanishes. This is a turning point, as Beckett wonders if Alma is actually the problem here or something else, because nothing about the Beast felt like her. It felt like something else, something hot and burning, like a cattle brand. He describes Alma to Stokes as feeling cold, but not biting like ice, more like deep ocean, a firm liquid cool that washes over you. She absolutely could have crushed him in an instant, easily, drowned him in his own liquefying lungs, ripped him apart atom by atom. But she didn't. Stokes is wary but willing to trust Beckett's instincts on this and agrees to stay on alert for anything else. Meanwhile, Keegan would get progressively crass and hot-headed as time goes on, and at a certain point in the school brushes Beckett off as a pussy who needs to man up, even going so far as to sarcastically ask if he was the unit bitch back in the Marines. Beckett, usually calm and level-headed under pressure, decks Keegan and knocks him out cold, much to Stokes' alarm. She doesn't blame Beckett, of course, she's just disgusted by Keegan's behaviour and frustrated by their situation overall. While the initial goal is to follow Aristide's orders to stop Alma, this eventually turns on its head when Beckett and Stokes learn too much from Halford and begin to have doubts, leading to Morales confronting Aristide only to be unexpectedly shot because Aristide is out of time and patience. She reveals that the true source of this psychic fuckery is Harlan Wade, Alma's father. Something happened to him in the facility, and now Aristide doesn't know what he is, but she does know that the board will be very interested in him. If she can't get her hands on Alma, Harlan will have to do. At this point, Keegan has been possessed by Harlan and disappeared, leading us on a chase to Still Island where we need to stop him. His continued presence is causing a negative feedback loop between himself and Alma, worsening the situation in the city by the hour. Through Beckett's psychometry, we see flashes of what Alma was put through, and it's enough that Beckett grows increasingly angry for her. At this point, Alma has stopped following them, and Stokes posits that it's because she's afraid of Still Island. There's too much pain tied to it. We finally reach the source of Harlan's signature, and it's the grassy drainage ditch where Alma had her swings, surrounded on all sides by barbed wire, spotlights, and bulletproof observation windows. He monologues about his wife, Elizabeth, picking up the doll she gave Alma, only to burn it in his hands and spit. She had one job: to keep Alma calm, manageable, under control, but the stupid bitch couldn't even do that. When something is no longer of use, you discard it. And that's exactly what he did with her. That's when the fire in the lab started. When Alma showed her true face, she didn't understand they were just trying to protect her from the rest of the world. He warns Beckett to never have children because they will always be ungrateful, thinking the world should be all about them. They won't care that you're the reason they exist. They owe you their life. That little bitch owed me her life. I was doing what was best for her, and she couldn't think about anything but her own selfish freedom. Keegan's voice tells Beckett they can't let him live. They have so much to accomplish. Beckett is dragged into a warped mindscape similar to the base game, where Keegan taunts him about his trauma, bragging that his favourite thing to do back in the day was break in fresh meat like him. Beckett eventually gets the better of Keegan and forces Harlan's spirit out of him, which is when Aristide drops in with a fucking steel chair and contains Harlan in a capture device for leverage so she can save her skin. She flees before Stokes can stop her. Keegan and Beckett are laid out on the grass, exhausted, but when Beckett demands to know if what Keegan said was true, Keegan coughs up some blood with a laugh and callously remarks that he knew Beckett was a unit bitch the moment they met. Beckett loses it, climbing on top of Keegan in a feral scramble as he begins beating the man's face in with a rock, cursing and screaming, briefly seeing Frank's grinning mug with each strike until Keegan is completely silent and limp, his face nothing more than a gory hollow of pulverized bone, teeth, and brains. Beckett staggers away from the body and collapses against the tree holding Alma's swing, sobbing brokenly after keeping his shit together for most of the game. Eventually, he is approached by Stokes, who reaches out a hand and tells him that they need to get moving, and it's safer to cry in the APC anyhow. Beckett laughs through the tears just a little and allows Stokes to help him up. The game ends with them fading into the smoke as they walk away from Keegan's body and the swing tree. Hold on to your tits, gang, we're nearly at the end. I had fewer concrete thoughts about what the third game would be about, so this is more just a bunch of things thrown together than any specific interaction. A year passes since the events of the last game. We do play as Point Man again, and Paxton is there, but not in a co-op fashion. Rather, Paxton is used to supplement and add to Quinn's combat abilities. Quinn can pick out targets for Paxton to possess or distract, get him to open doors from the other side, hit switches that are out of reach, that kind of thing. Their relationship isn't exactly loving, but it's friendlier than it is in the original, and over the course of the game, it develops into a genuine brotherly bond as they fight to finish off Armacham and rid the world of Harlan Wade for good. Neither of them really know how to be well-adjusted, but they're both sincerely trying, even if Paxton can't help but say odd, morbid shit from time to time. The Creep would return as a stalker enemy, and Alma would continually show up attempting to protect the brothers, sliding into creepy good territory. It'd be clear that while playing host to Alma is physically demanding on Alice, she makes it clear that if she were to say no, Alma would vacate immediately. She'll rest when Harlan and Armacham are finally gone. Beckett and Stokes would also make an appearance in the interest of fighting Armacham, and it's clear since we last saw them that they've developed their powers further. Stokes is able to drain life from people she can touch, and Beckett can extend his empathic abilities like an aura to bolster his allies or terrify opponents. And since we're not using anything from Extraction, Jin and Douglas are alive and can help the fight as well from a tech-focused angle, bringing in Betters and the other F.E.A.R teams. It's a real collaborative project to help end this, because whoopsie doodle, Aristide's plan to use Harlan's musty ghost for her own survival backfires horribly, and now half of Fairport is a horrifying playground of psychological fuckery. This does all eventually lead to the same conclusion as the base game, where the brothers return to the ward facility where they were raised to confront Harlan. They weaken him by finding and destroying items with strong psychic links to the pain he inflicted on them, and an earlier level would be spent doing the same thing but for items connected to Alma, the most notable of which would be her music box, killing Aristide in the process of getting it. Harlan is fought as the kaiju creep and is destroyed by the children he turned into monsters and freaks because he cared more about the legacy of godhood more than he did about being a loving father. This results in the ruined half of Fairport falling silent, all the supernatural elements slowly disintegrating to ash under the light of the sun. Paxton reassures his brother that he doesn't plan on going anywhere now that they have a chance to forge their own path. He might be a ghost, but he honestly feels more at ease like this than he ever did as flesh and blood. Stokes and Beckett officially join F.E.A.R to help out with any future supernatural instance, and as for Alma, she finally gets the peace of mind she wanted with Harlan and Armacham's destruction, able to let go knowing that their evil is gone from the world, and so fades into oblivion with a smile on her face. Oh my god, I vastly underestimated how long this would get, but holy shit, it's done. As I said at the beginning, this was meant to be a special that I did when I hit 10,000 subs, which I thought would be much later in the year, but yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for deciding my shenanigans are worth your time. I appreciate it a lot. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment if you have a game you'd like to inflict on me. Special shout-out to my supporters on Patreon who are all very handsome people, and if you'd also like to be called a very handsome people, check out the link in the description. Patrons of all tiers get access to uncensored videos in the event YouTube doesn't like the content of the game I'm covering, and patrons of the affectionate nerd tier get to see behind-the-scenes content and intros for upcoming videos. If you're interested in consuming some of my ADHD adult nonsense unfiltered by editing, I also stream on Twitch every Wednesday and Friday at 8 PM British summertime. I hope every single one of you has an amazing summer and that you make sure to take extra care of yourselves. Water, sunscreen, meds if you take them, all that. Please be kind to yourselves, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.